Hey everyone, thank you for tuning in to Mando's Mindset. Before we dive into today's episode, I want to take a moment to address the challenging, heavy conversation that you're about to hear. My guest, Elaine Lindsay, shares very personal experiences about her own personal struggles with suicide ideation, including the loss of her best friend to suicide when she was only 16 years old. We also touch upon my own story as I open up about my uncle's passing in a similar way. Now, these are very difficult topics to talk about, and they often carry a sense of shame and isolation. But I want to remind you, you're not alone. It's common for people who are struggling to feel like they are a burden. I want to emphasize to you that reaching out for help is never a sign of weakness. Life can be incredibly hard, but no challenge is not fixable. And there are people who care and want to help you. Full disclosure, I'm not a therapist or a counselor, but I do believe in the power of community and connection. If any of you listening to me right now are struggling or you need support, don't hesitate to reach out to someone you trust. You can also contact the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline by dialing 988. There are people available 24/7, and they offer support. I will say this too. If you are listening to me right now, you can contact me. My information is in the show notes. You can email me. You can contact me on social media. Instagram is either The Breathing Goddess or Mando's Mindset. I want you to know, if you're listening to me right now, you're not going through this alone. Whether you've spoken to me before or you've never spoken to me before, I'm here for you. When you hear me say in every single episode that I'm proud of you and I'm rooting for you, I wholeheartedly mean that. As we go through this conversation, please take care of yourself and your mental health. If any of the topics feel too heavy, feel free to pause the episode or come back to it later. You're not alone in your journey. And if listening to this brings up anything for you, please know you can reach out to me. You can also reach out to Elaine. Her information is in the show notes. Either one of us would be more than happy to speak with you. We are all in this together, and everyone's life has value. Thank you for being here. Not only here listening to Mando's Mindset, but thank you for being alive. I'm glad that you exist. I'm proud of you, and I'm always rooting for you. We are losing so many people to suicide every single day. According to the CDC, in 2021, suicide was the 11th leading cause of death overall in the U.S., claiming over 48,000 lives. And this statistic that I read blew my mind. Suicide was the second leading cause of death among individuals between the ages of 10 to 14 and 25 to 34. We are losing so many people to suicide daily, and it needs to stop. And one of the first ways for us to put an end to this is to start talking about things. There needs to be less shame around this topic. If anything in this episode is triggering to you or something comes up and you would like to discuss it, you can reach out to me or Elaine. And don't forget, I'm always rooting for you and cheering you on. You got this. Now let's get into the episode.
Welcome to the Manders Mindset Podcast. Here you'll find both monologue and interviews of entrepreneurs, coaches, healers, and a variety of other people, where your host Amanda Russo will discuss her own mindset and perspective and her guest mindset and perspective on the world around us. Manders and her guests will help explain to you how shifting your mindset will shift your life.
Hey guys, welcome back to Amanda's Mindset. As always, I'm your host, Amanda Russo, and I'm here today with a very special guest. I am here today with Elaine Lindsay, and Elaine and I got connected through PodFest. We didn't happen to meet directly at PodFest, but we got connected after PodFest, and I am so excited to be here with her today. She is also known as the Queen of Reinvention. She speaks candidly about her experiences, infusing her narratives with humor and insightful observations. Her multifaceted career encompasses roles as a speaker, podcaster, writer, part-time comedian, and social media foundation specialist. Driven by a profound mission to shatter the silence, stigma, and shame surrounding suicide, loss, ideation, and mental health, Elaine is the host of the Suicide Zen Forgiveness podcast. She is an eternal optimist with a profound gratitude attitude. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. Actually thrilled to be here.
I'm thrilled to have you. Okay, so that was a great bio that you sent me, but I'm curious, who would you say Elaine is at the core?
Oh, that's really good. That's a good question. I am a big goofball. I am a weird mixture of suicidal ideation and Pollyanna. It's absolutely the two extremes that there are. And, it took a very long time to learn the name of one, the ideation, and to integrate the two of them. Because I finally learned in the past few years that it's critically important to embrace all the facets of ourselves. Some of them we may not like. Some, in fact, I'll say I hate, which is a very strong word, and I'm working on that. But it's important that we bring them all together and like them until we love them, because they all serve a purpose. And I believe that it's critically important to take the lesson from the bad, also the good, but mostly from the bad. Because if you don't take the lesson, you're going to repeat it.
The Suicide Ideation podcast, where did this come from?
So when I was a teenager, I had suicidal ideation since I was a kid. I just didn't know what it was. I didn't know it had a name. But for me, any option, whether I burnt my toast or I got in trouble at school or something terrible happened in the family, one of the options on the table for me was always, I could just end it. Didn't matter what else was going on. It was always a part. But then there was always that Pollyanna piece that played the glad game every day and always found something to be thankful for. So it was a really weird dichotomy. And when I was 16, I lost a friend to suicide. And it had such a profound effect on me because it played into this, what at the time was an unnamed problem I had. And it made it frighteningly real. My friend was Jewish. I'm Catholic. The other four of our friends were Catholic. We're used to all the trappings when someone dies. There are, lack of a better word, parties and wakes and all this rigmarole that you go through in viewing the body. And so you have time to process. Well, on top of everything else in my head, she had to be buried within 24 hours, which meant we didn't get any of that. You get 7 days to sit Shiva. The family were very kind in bringing us into the family and having us sit Shiva with the family, which meant all the mirrors were covered. And we learned all kinds of things more about Andrea, but also about her family. And it was a full week-long event, but it didn't allow for that closure that you can start with when you get to see someone when they're no longer vital and alive. I couldn't have put that into words back then either. I just knew that I was full of feelings I didn't want to feel, and I didn't want to be there. I did not want to be this person. I didn't want to be in this state. So I turned to drugs and alcohol in high school. I totally annihilated my life. And I spent, some weeks, 3-4 nights in the cemetery wanting an answer to why. And knowing, I think, in the back of my mind that was never going to happen. But it became ritual, and it frightened my parents so badly that they took me back to Scotland for 6 weeks later that year. Andrea died New Year's Eve, just coming into 1972. And when I got to Scotland, I felt bad for my parents later because they just gave me a whole new group of friends to party and get drunk with, do drugs, and stay out of all the feelings. And for what it's worth, in looking back now and after working with a spiritual mentor and other people, we've come to understand that I basically just left. I went back to being about 12 years old because that was a time of less complication, less realness, less pain, and no grief. So for me, I started going through my life, not maturing, not getting mentally any older, being totally lacking in any maturity, and just not sort of playing the game of life. I was playing the game in that I got married early, lost a child, and then 4 years after, I was crushed on the highway in front of her grave. I was crushed between 3 cars. I was 7 months pregnant. I lost the baby. I lost half my left leg from the calf all the way up to my thigh, part of my femur vertically, because the engine of my Mustang took it when the cars came together on me and split apart. And I will swear to this day that before I hit that highway, frozen highway, it was the 19th of March, 20th of March, and it was 30 below. And as I went flying through the air, it was like somebody put the hood up on this big fur coat I had on, and it saved my head from splitting like a melon. I attribute that to Andrea. And rightly or wrongly, that and the fact that I was one left behind when she took her life. For the next 50 years, it always came to that piece when I was ready to leave, when I couldn't take any more pain, when things were just not what I could deal with. There was always that little voice in my ear. You know what it feels like to be left behind. Are you really going to do that to your family? What about your children? What about your husband? And it was always Andrea in my ear. So come 2018, I had been invited to LinkedIn in Toronto with work. I spent the day down there, and when I got there that morning, I had a brand new phone, and I needed a new phone case. So coming through the train station, there was a little store, and I went in, and there was a Kate Spade phone case. It was really pretty and blingy, and I like my bling. And it had Swarovski crystals and flowers on it. And I thought, oh, that's really nice. Who's that by? So I bought it. That afternoon, I found out that she had taken her life. Within the week, Anthony Bourdain took his life. And I had only started talking about my own life story a couple of years before. And I realized that, in essence, Andrea had given me the best, worst gift you could ever give someone. It was time for me to step up and give back. Because we are losing too many people all the time in almost every demographic. And that led to the start of the podcast, which was originally called Keep Breathing. It was sporadic. I didn't really know what I was doing with it or what I wanted to turn it into. In January of 21, a friend called me from California. She said, I know you don't like Apple. Don't buy a phone. Just go get an iPad. You have to try this Clubhouse thing. I think it could be useful for you. Okay. So I went and got myself an iPad. And when I met her in Clubhouse, she said, would you please tell the group what you do and how you got here? And all of a sudden, I heard myself telling them about Andrea and telling them about the podcast. And my friend was in shock because she didn't know about my accident. She didn't know about what came later, which I'll tell you in a minute. And she said, like, who are you talking about? Where did this come from? My life story. I just never told anybody. And I am 68 years of age. I did not tell a soul anything about my life until 2013. And that car accident happened in 1976. So it was a long time coming. But I smiled because that accident was just the first in a series of life lessons. They were very, very hard to learn. They made me a very nasty person because I wasn't just me anymore. I was a victim. And that's not anywhere I ever wanted to be, nor would I ever go back.
Now, you mentioned you got involved in drugs and alcohol in high school, and that was after Andrea passed. How did you stop that?
Well, that's a really good question. At the time of, I guess, 1907, when I got married and was pregnant with my daughter, I just literally stopped because I was pregnant. And I took it up again later, but through my whole pregnancy, I did nothing. And that happened 2 years later when I had another little girl. Unfortunately, she died. And after the accident, I was on so much pharmaceutical medication. There was no room for anything else. I was in such bad shape. I ended up with no kneecaps, no cartilage in either leg. I had surgery on one or the other leg about every 4 months for the next 5 years. I had to have massive skin grafting done to my leg to cover the hole, part of the hole. Just as an offside, my father told me, still says, I should tell people I got bit by a shark because it's a better story. And it just became a substitute for drink and street drugs. It was just easier to take the pharmaceuticals. Sadly, they were much more dangerous because I was taking enough morphine for probably 5 or 6 people. By the mid 90s, I was taking well over 200 milligrams of morphine every day. Plus, they were all intolerant and value, all kinds of other things, because the pain was so intense in so many places. And they didn't have pain clinics. They didn't have someone who could have explained to me that I could meditate, I could learn to visualize, I could learn to handle it. That came much, much later. And not until I had to take, obviously I did not take that lesson that time, because later on I was hit by another car, but that comes much later. I knew that was going to get you.
Yeah, that did get me. My eye just bugged out of my head. Continue.
So after the accident, another sort of offshoot of that was they started giving me cortisone shots for my legs. But I got them every month for 5 years. And back then, they had no idea what cortisone did. They just knew that after a day or two of pain, had days where it didn't hurt. But what that meant was you could push yourself really far and do even more damage. Nobody knew that. And another thing about cortisone, it rots your teeth from under the gums. It can make your bones brittle. It can do a lot of very nasty things. And now, when you have surgery, it's right on the questionnaire, have you ever had cortisone? Because now they know what some of those complications are. I became a bit of a guinea pig later on for certain pharmaceutical because they had to give me so. But those 5 years after the accident, I didn't deal well with what had happened. I could not come to terms with the big hole in my leg. I couldn't deal with the fact that in my head, I had always just been big blue eyes and long, long legs, which is kind of a joke because I'm 5'2", but they were long for 5'2". But in my head, that's all I was. I had no self-confidence, no self-esteem. And my head was all wrapped up in losing my friend. It was a terrible soup in there, let's just be honest. Being a victim meant that I would lash out first, say terrible things about me, so no one else could. It was sort of a way to make fun of what I thought other people were staring at, what I thought other people found ugly. Because I sure as hell found it ugly. And after those 5 years, I had put on weight. I've never been big. Okay, I figure skated, I rode horses, I downhill skied, I swam. There was no sport I didn't do. I was always active, doing everything. And then the accident took all of that away. I tried to ski a year or two after the accident. Unfortunately, my right leg decided it was going different directions than the rest of me. The skiing became a non-event. It was always hard to control my left leg after that. By 1980, I had ruined one marriage and was getting into another. By 1982, I had a little boy. And by the time he was about 3 or 4 months old, I was fully convinced I was disgusting. I was horrible. I was a bad person, all these things. And there's an interesting thing about the universe. The universe will confirm whatever it is that you want. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, you will find confirmation for what you look for. So I had heard about stomach stapling as a way to lose weight. And we had gone in a way. It's called stomach stapling. It was called a vertical banded gastroplasty. It was only about a year old, and I learned that there was one doctor in our city that was doing it. I saw this on TV, and we had gone, whole family, for brunch one Sunday. My son was a few months old. I went into the washroom at the restaurant. When I was washing my hands at the sink, a lady came out of a stall and she came up behind me and looked at me in the mirror and she said, "Oh my God, you are so beautiful. Why are you fat?" And that was my confirmation that what I had decided to do was the right thing. Unfortunately, my whole family freaked out. Nobody wanted me to do this. I had had lots of surgery at this point. They didn't want me having it. This was, in their words, ludicrous. There was absolutely no reason to do this. But I thought this would make me accept me, because I didn't. And the hatred I had for me was burning through my soul. I just absolutely abhorred everything about me. I thought I was the worst thing on the planet. It's funny what your head does. And in a way, it's weirdly conceited to think that everybody's paying attention. But that woman who, I couldn't even tell you what she looked like now. Okay? She was just the universe's way of giving me what I asked. So I set up everything I needed to take 3 weeks off work. We brought in a housekeeper to look after the children. Everything was set out. This is what was happening. I had to go through psychological testing and all kinds of things to be ready for this surgery. And I passed everything with flying colors. Before I went into the surgery, I lost 20 pounds. And that was my commitment, showing them that I was very eager to have this done. Unfortunately, what we didn't know, the doctor was already being investigated because he'd killed 2 people with this surgery. We had absolutely no idea, and neither did the doctor who recommended it. I went into the hospital all ready to do my thing. I knew that for 3 weeks, I would have a tube in my left side that I would feed through. I could have nothing by mouth. I would be in the hospital for 1 week. And at the end of 3 weeks, they would take the tube out and I would go into eating in a whole new way to suit this now smaller stomach. Unfortunately, during the surgery, we'll never know what actually happened because we found out in court 12 years later that the doctor had made a couple of OR reports for that surgery, trying to cover his mistake. He lied and said he did things that made no sense. None of it made any sense to us, but we didn't find out for 12 years. I went home on the Saturday. I had this weird pain in my left shoulder blade. Didn't know what it was. I had told the nurse, and I had a fever. They couldn't get rid of the fever all week. The doctor said, "You can go home as long as you promise you will come in on Tuesday and do a swallow to make sure everything's okay." Yep, no problem. I knew I would do better at home. Unfortunately, I went home and this pain just got worse and worse. I couldn't sit, I couldn't stand, I couldn't lie down. And after 17 hours, my husband called emergency, took me in. They weren't even sure what to do because it was an experimental surgery. And only that one doctor knew much about it. This was 1983. It wasn't even called bariatric surgery because it was a single surgery, the first one they. After the doctor in emergency gave me a shot for pain, he wrote a prescription because we had to put whatever I was going to take through the tube in my side. I couldn't have anything by mouth. Turns out it saved my life because while we were there, we were getting ready to come home, and the resident who was in my surgery came walking through the emergency. My husband said the look on his face when he saw me was absolute terror. And my husband said, "I didn't know what was wrong, but I knew something was very wrong." And the next thing we know, he was calling the head of X-ray and calling other doctors. They were telling me that I couldn't leave. And I just wanted to go home. I wanted nothing to do with this. It's like, no, I'll just go home. I'll be fine. He said, no, you can't go home. We have to do a special test. So they did a test. They came back, and not giving us a reason or telling us anything else. They said I had developed a gastric leak. The doctor came through into where my gurney was outside the operating room, and he said, so what did you eat? What did you drink? And I thought, what? I said to him, I'm sorry, that makes no sense. Okay, my whole family is angry at me for doing this. Why would I jeopardize that? I have to show them that this works. It would make no sense for me to do that. Now we know he was gaslighting because he could lose his job because of this investigation already. So they take me to OR for the second time. Once again, we have no idea what he really did. This time there are 3 OR reports. In one of them, he says he took my appendix out, which is odd because someone actually took it out in 1992. I don't think they grow back, but what do I know? In that second surgery, to the best of our understanding, he just opened up half the abdomen and just kind of looked. He didn't really do anything. So the stomach was wrapped in this stuff we call omentum that you find inside your body. And that's what they put around anything that they work on. Well, it basically created a pouch. And that pouch was percolating, full of infection. So on the 4th day after the second surgery, I had an abscess on my left lung. And when my lung collapsed, they put in a chest machine and a hose in my side. The next day, I developed peritonitis. I was going septic.
What is peritonitis?
It's the whole abdomen becomes infected.
Okay.
What they think happened is that pouch burst open and all the infection just went all over the abdomen. But again, these OR reports are pure fantasy. And know that on the 28th of September, which was my daughter's birthday, they took me back to X-ray, and the head of X-ray said, we have to take you back to OR right now, or you will be dead by supper. And I said, thank you. No, thank you. And then I got a nurse to get me a phone. We didn't have cell phones back then. And I called my father, and I called my husband, and I said, don't you dare sign anything. I'm not having any more surgery. Well, I don't know which one of them signed it or if both of them did. Yes, the threat of me being dead by supper, they decided they would sign the paper no matter what I said. He took me back into surgery. The first thing we know that happened is my heart stopped. He, I guess, in response to already being investigated, took everything apart. He ripped apart what he'd done. So my stomach was no longer stable. We did not know this for 12 years. When he was trying to put it back together, you can only rip people's organs apart so many times in 3 weeks. Okay? They just don't go back together. Your skin becomes what they call friable. It becomes like jello, like you can't stitch it.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So the resident said that I just stopped breathing. They were trying to get me breathing again. And he called in another surgeon. He got him, had a hole in my throat. Basically, he slit my throat and went through to the esophagus and diverted my esophagus out my neck. I can honestly say I've never heard of that before. And in all my years, no one, medical or otherwise, has ever heard of this before. There were so many tubes coming out of me when I woke up in ICU that they had to bring in gravity suction bottles on the floor because there weren't enough things on the walls to take them on. And I had a little hose coming out of my neck. It's kind of like battery acid, and it was blistering all of my chest. And I think his idea was to not let anything get to the stomach, try and let it heal. But that meant that the saliva was all over me. And it was just getting worse. All of my skin was blistered. And I was in ICU for 11 days. And when they took me up to a ward, one of the nurses realized that they should probably call people that do the stoma therapy, which is colostomy bags, for people with bowel missing. They put colostomy bags on them, and the stoma therapists teach them how to use them. They brought in a stoma therapist, and she taught me how to use a colostomy bag on my neck. That was left like that for 7 months. Meanwhile, I'm feeding through the tube in my side, which I kept for over a year. And it would fall out, the stopcock would fall out, or the tube would come out, and they'd have to cut me open again, put another one in. That was like 2 or 3 times a month, more than a year. It got to be incredibly painful, incredibly annoying and messy. And I had this big tube on the right side. We were never sure where he went or where he came from. But he went home with me. I had him for over 7 months, so I called him Hugo, because you go where I go. You got to find the humor where you can, right? It took me more than a year to start learning to eat again. I had to do what they call dilatations to my throat to try and get rid of the scar tissue. The upshot of all this was, instead of me getting what I want, yes, I lost a great deal of weight, but then I lived on Onshore, the protein drink, for 10 years. If you live on nothing but Onshore, you can put on 25 pounds a year. So it just meant that I was yo-yoing back to where I was. And we didn't understand why, because we didn't know he'd taken it. Which, of course, did not make me a nice person. I had done all this. I had gone against my family. I was in a worse place than I had been before. Instead of just horrific scars on my legs, I had horrific scars everywhere. And that became like a reason to hate me more. And it just got worse and worse. And then, I guess in the mid-90s, I started wondering, this can't be all there is to life. They just can't be crap on crap on crap. So, the universe took over. And in 1997, I was walking with my daughter and my son and my one granddaughter. Mine, she was about 3. We'd gone for an early dinner because my son was going to cadet. My son and daughter are 9 years apart. He was getting ready for air cadet. And we were walking back to our car from the restaurant. And this man was backing up. And we were behind his car. But he was looking forward. I don't know why. And so I knocked on the back of his car just to say, hey, stop. People are here. And then we were going to keep walking. Well, the next thing we know, this giant man gets out of his car, and he's almost foaming at the mouth. You effing bitch, what's wrong with you? Why can't you wait? And that screaming. My daughter said, like, there's a baby here. What is wrong with you? And I told him he was mental. Get back in your car and get lost. You're insane. And we walked up to our car. And I can't tell you where any of us were. I just know my daughter started screaming. I looked, and he had driven up the aisle of cars and turned his car in, aimed at my kid. So I stepped in the way. He hit me in my legs. I fell on top of his car. Then he backed up with me on his car. Luckily for us, there were people all around that made him stop and were screaming at him. And then I slid to the ground off the car. Somebody called an ambulance. Somebody called the police. A big thing. He'd been in the bar drinking before this. When the ambulance drivers got there, I was so worried about how embarrassed I would be. They had to pick up this fat woman and how horrible that was. By the time I got in the ambulance, it was like I was watching me, and there was this big aha, like, oh my God, this is all you're worried about? Your legs are totaled already. This is nuts. And I thought, you know what? There really has to be more to life than this. Like, why is this happening? And as I said it, it was like, this right here. You're the common denominator. That was the start of me digging into everything I could research. What is life? What is energy? What is, all of it.
Now, before we keep going down all the roads, how did you find out 12 years later the doctor was... I feel like I'm watching a movie.
Yeah. We went to court, and the upshot
how did
was...
it come about? How do you know he was a fraud?
Because we didn't know he was a fraud, but what happened, that's a really good question, actually. At the end of the year, I was still not able to eat. Okay, I couldn't swallow properly. I was in pain all the time. And he said, it's all in your head. And walked out of the office. And 2 nurses came and said, you have to stop him. He's going to kill more people. I said, what are you talking about? He killed 2 people before you. And that's when I knew I had to take him to court. But you have to understand, we're in Canada. And in 1993, which is when we finally, 94, when we finally got to court, I only had the option of a judge, no jury. No doctor in Canada would go against another doctor. Because in Canada, there weren't lawsuits back then. Not like America. I would have made a killing in America. But what we learned later, for what it's worth, we were told the judge was bought. At the end of the trial, after 4 months, the head of the law firm that was working on my case marched me over to the office and presented me with a bill for $768,426.29. I said, are you fucking kidding me? You couldn't knock off 29 cents? And he said, Elaine, you're being rude. When the judge's decision came back, he found $500,000 in damages. He just couldn't pin it on the doctor. The doctor brought the missing x-ray to court, and the head of my law firm became a superior court judge in Toronto. The law firm disintegrated, but the last thing they did was take me to the defense lawyer's office and said, if you try to appeal this, we will take your father's house. Because in Canada, when you do a medical malpractice or any family law, the entire family is involved. And my parents only had one house they had bought after long, hard years of work, and I would not do that to them. I said, keep your damn money, and you'll get yours. That left me bitter. That was in 1996. Along with that decision, I got a letter saying that I'd better go be tested because the blood I got in the hospital came from American prisoners. Many of them had HIV and Hep C.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
How old were you when you had this surgery?
27.
You were my age.
Yeah.
Okay. And you were 16 when your best friend passed away?
Yeah. And I was 20 when I lost part of my... Yeah. 2001, I fell getting out of my car, and my arm shattered in 1,000 pieces. They found out I had osteoporosis, also courtesy of the botched surgery. In 2003, Christmas was diabetes. So now I'm on insulin. In 2016, I collapsed at a comedy club, which is not funny. I kept thinking, oh, please, God, don't let me die in a comedy club. That's just too cliche. But the doctor realized that there was something very wrong in this collapsing, and they found that I have mitral valve disease. And they investigated further. Then they found out I had cirrhosis. That all came from what he had done, because the long-term effect of weight loss, bariatric surgery, is malabsorption, malnutrition, serious bowel issues, pancreatitis, cirrhosis, gastric stenosis, a million things. And I have cirrhosis. I've known that for a long time. Last fall, we found out I have pancreatitis. And just, I guess, the latest in what he left me with. Why I talk about that is because all of the Ozempic and Wegovy and all of these current semaglutide answers to weight loss frighten the hell out of me, because they don't have long-term effects. They don't know. They haven't been around long enough. And I am walking proof, 40-odd years, of all the things that can continue to go wrong. Good news is, for me, over COVID, I started working with a spiritual mentor. I started working with her and learning meditation and visualization. And I read every book I could get my hands on, from the 9th Insight to the 4 Agreements. But reading all of that to come to understand, I have choice. I run this ship. I can decide whether or not I'm going to make it run well or not. Even with all those things, I no longer have hepatitis C. That comes from a lot of interior work. But back in 2016, I couldn't get to a place where I could even like. That was making it very difficult to really change. And my spiritual mentor and other people took it upon themselves to basically make an intervention. And someone brought me the concept of kintsugi, the Japanese art of repairing broken crockery, because they believed that when something breaks, you don't throw it away. They would repair it with real gold paint. That became more beautiful than the original piece. And so rather than throwing these things away, being angry with them or upset or embarrassed or shamed, you would put them in a place of honor and display them. Not ready to do that yet. And I did say at the time, oh, so paint my scars with gold paint. Okay, can we buy it by the keg? That's how many scars there are. It just kind of dipped me from the neck down.
Oh, God.
Anyway, it was about learning the lesson and taking the empathy from having gone through some of the most horrifically painful times of anyone's life. Having surgery after surgery after surgery. And coming to understand that, I gotta take the Pollyanna. I gotta find the glad game that goes with all of this. And what are the things that I can take away from this? Maybe help somebody else. And I will say, like everything else in my life, there's a yin and a yang. I have empathy for people who suffer. I don't have empathy for people who whine about a cold. It's kind of funny because I don't suffer fools gladly. Never have. But
Good. Okay.
It is what it is. And in 2018, I got on stage, comedy club, did my 6 minutes, and got invited back. So I got on another stage the next year at a different comedy club.
You mentioned a couple different horrific experiences that you've gone through. Do you believe as human beings we have to undergo horrific experiences?
Yes and no. I believe, okay, there's all these things. Souls travel in packs, and we come from a collective energy. But I believe it's this way. Our soul comes to Earth to experience life as a human. And when you do, it's like, some people go to Disney. They go because they want to get on, or the teacups or whatever. And some of us get on for the scorpion and the roller coaster and the really good, terrifying. That's kind of what it is. So if your soul books big rides, those big rides can be pretty damn scary. If you take the lesson, you only have to go around once. Obviously, a little slow. I didn't take the lessons right away. Well, in my case, they're not bricks. They're vehicles. See, now that's playing the glad game.
Okay.
It's a little bent, but it works for me. And the upshot of all of it is, when I started after 97, being grateful for little things. The more I was grateful for, the more that was in front of me. Everything you're grateful for. Sometimes I believe in getting up and stating your gratitudes. What are you grateful for today? Or do it last thing at night. Make a list of 5 things. And there are some days where I'm grateful for the fact that I'm breathing. I'm grateful for the fact that as much as it takes me a long time to get upright and to walk, because it's not elegant, I'm walking, and there are people who can. So you take those things for what they're worth. And I am grateful that I have 5 fabulous grandchildren. I have 2 beautiful adult children. I have a long-suffering husband, 44 years. father. He's 91, but he got dementia just before he turned 90. That for us is a gift. You know, people who got dementia in their 50s and 60s. So when you really look, there's a lot to be grateful for. So I try every day, and there are days where the pain just takes over. Everything is too much, and I allow myself what I call wallow time. But I put a time limit on that wallow.
You say wallow time?
I did. Wallow, you know, pity party, poor me, bad man.
Okay.
That kind of thing. One other thing I want to say, I started working with the soul coach in late 2019. And from 2020, 2021, I dropped 80 pounds. What that did, through all that time, I started dropping all the pharmaceuticals I was taking. Because I call myself a functional junkie, because I needed all the pain meds just to function. The pain is pretty intense. But I went for more than 200 milligrams. Now, I take one 15 milligram Morphine every evening. That's it, and that's all. That's something that I am ever so grateful for. I'd like it to be none, but right at the moment, we're not there.
Okay. Wow. So there's a lot of places I want to take this. In terms of your podcast, how soon after Andrea passing did you start that?
Start the podcast?
Yeah.
Oh, not till 2018.
Oh, so that's it.
Yeah. And only seriously weekly was 2021, because I didn't understand, you know, how do I best make this a gift to Andrea for what she gave me, but how do I help others? And I came to understand through finally telling my story. Because see, I never told anybody this because I thought it was shameful. I was ashamed that I had to lose weight. I was ashamed I had to have that surgery. I was ashamed that I went out in the middle of the night to pick up a friend who was an asshole and was picked up for drinking and driving. Why I ended up between those three cars. It was all these things of guilt and shame. Well, I never said a word. And in 2013, when I was asked to tell my story, the first two people who came to me and said, "We would really like to hear this," were my adult children. And I said, "What are you talking about? You lived it." Because my husband hears it all the time. I lied. But I'm always complaining. When I started telling people, people started saying that's offering hope for somebody else. And I started to realize that if I don't tell people, what if I let someone else hurt themselves? Because they don't know what could happen. I don't want to have that opportunity. And telling your story lightens your burden.
Yes, it does. So I'm curious, what made you decide 2018 now is when you're going to start the podcast? Why then?
Well, that was the day that I found out about Kate Spade, and that week was Anthony Bourdain. It just
That
sort of
Right. That was right before the part. Okay.
Yeah, it all came to a head. And it was like, okay, you know what? I'll start a podcast, because I had been doing an online show since 2012 where I interviewed people. And I thought, okay, I can do this as a podcast and talk to people. And that can help them with their story.
What type of guests do you primarily interview on your podcast?
Well, we discuss suicide loss, ideation, and all forms of mental health. We have covered the gamut from anxiety, depression. I have a very dear friend whose father took his own life and that of her sister when she was 10 years old. And I mean, that's a horrific story to live through, a horrific story to have to tell. But once you get it out there, then you're not carting it around anymore. And people who have lost their husbands, their wives, their children, their fathers, their mothers, all of them. We have almost 130 episodes mixed in with a number of solo ones where I talk about the lessons I've learned on my journey. Because, there's a whole bunch of them.
Would you say there is shame around suicide?
Absolutely. And that's the whole point of my mission, is the silence, the shame, and the stigma. We need to stop that. Okay? Because the bottom line is this. Some people say it is the absence of hope. If you get to a place where you no longer have hope, that is when people take their lives. But it's not about leaving people. It's not about taking their life. Mostly, it's about ending their pain, whatever that is, whether it's emotional or mental or spiritual or physical. It's about ending that pain. And if you talk to people who have attempted, they always say that they were leaving to make it better for those that are still here. It's the chemicals in the brain that tell you these stories. As children, we're not told how to deal with our feelings, the thoughts in our head, or our brain. Nobody tells you how to drive your brain. Rex Sykes said it best. Like, you get a license to get a bicycle. You get a license to get a cat or a dog. There's no license for your brain. Nobody teaches you what to do with it. It's the best computer on the planet. And we're just handed it and have at her. No, it doesn't make any sense. Children, if you don't teach them, there are no bad feelings. Because even anger has a use. We have to understand that feelings last 3 to 90 seconds. They're meant to flow and go. We're not meant to hang on to them. But that's what we do because we don't know any better. The animals do that. Watch animals when they think there's a predator around. They all go on high alert. You can see them. They all jump out as one. They all run like hell. And when it's over, if you really watch, you'll see they all do this shimmy from tip to tail. And it's shimmying off the feelings, shimmying off the cortisol, the angst, all those things, all the hormones, all the terrifying feelings. They just shimmy them off and go on living until the next event. Humans don't do that. We drag it with us down the road till next week, and then we drag that one with us. And if something else, we drag that one with us.
So how do humans start to let things go?
Well, I think we need to start teaching people. Feelings are meant to flow and go. It's not an esoteric joke. It's a fact. And learning to handle anger, dismay, hurt, depression, annoyance, jealousy, all of those things. Handle them for those 90 seconds and then move on.
That makes a lot of sense. So you agree that there is shame around it.
Yeah.
Why?
I don't think there should be.
I struggle with this because my uncle committed suicide when I was 12, I wouldn't say.
I'm just going to stop you there because this is really important. We don't use that term anymore. You know why that was? Because at one time it was illegal.
Yeah, I do remember that.
And so we say took his own life or died by suicide.
Good. Okay.
because it is very triggering for people. And the fact is, the laws have changed as people have learned to be more forgiving, more empathetic, more understanding.
Okay. I knew at one point it was illegal, but I didn't realize that that's why it was said.
That term, yeah.
I never knew the two went together. Now, my uncle took his own life, and I think I was 12, but I didn't find out till I was 17 how he actually passed away. It was like this big family secret.
Yeah.
And I can understand why they didn't tell the kids. How do you explain that? Because it was graphic. How do you say that to a 12-year-old? I get it.
Yeah.
But there was still so much shame even as I got older. And it was still like this big family secret that it's not frequently talked about. And everybody knows that there's this one sister and it's her husband that, that took his life. And it's just like the elephant in the family almost.
It absolutely is. And it shouldn't be because, there's no shame that your alcoholic uncle died, drank himself to death, or
right.
aunt or grandmother or whatever. And to me,
that's rude.
Yes, it is. Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. But all of those are diseases. So there's nothing to be ashamed about. There's a lot to be sorrowful for. There's a lot of there should be empathy for the people around them that go on with this. But one of the horrible things I think is that people stop talking. People don't say their name anymore. They just put them to the side and they don't talk about it. One of the least known demographics are the number of children who have taken their own lives. And there are a lot. But people don't talk about it, so you don't get that in the death certificate. And the fact is, if we had the numbers, maybe people would do more about it. Because I just think it's horrific.
What do you think is the next step for us to be able to make it?
I think it has to become part of the day-to-day conversation. All the tough stuff, the taboo stuff, we have to make it part of conversation in families so that when your 10-year-old is having bizarre thoughts and they don't understand what to do with it. Because not all thoughts are real, not all thoughts are truthful, and not all thoughts need to be acted. But you can't know that if you've never been told.
Wow. This was some heavy stuff. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Have you heard of a man named Jay Shetty?
Yes, I know Jay Shetty.
I don't know if you heard my episode, so you might already know how I wrap this up. But he has 2 segments that he ends his podcast with, and I end mine with those as well. And the first one is called The Many Sides to Us. There's 5 questions, and they need to be answered in 1 word each.
All right.
Okay. Number 1. What is 1 word someone who was meeting you for the first time would describe you as?
Oh my God. Or I would like them to describe me as?
No, not what you would like them to. Just what they would describe you.
A handful.
Okay. Number 2. What is 1 word that someone who knows you extremely well would use to describe you?
Bent.
What is 1 word you use to describe yourself?
Funny.
Number 4. What is 1 word that if someone didn't like you or agree with your mindset would describe you?
Outspoken.
Okay. Number 5. What is one word you're embodying right now?
Real.
Then the second segment is the final 5, and these can be answered in a sentence. Number 1, what is the best advice you've heard or received?
Listen to your intuition.
Why is that the best advice?
Because when all is said and done, if you just be still and go inside, you know the answer to every question you've ever been in because your gut react.
Number 2, what is the worst advice you've heard or received?
Worst advice. People you got bit by a shark.
What is something that you used to value that you no longer value? If you could describe what you would want your legacy to be, as if someone were reading it, what would you want it to say?
You matter.
Number 5, if you could create one law in the world that everyone had to follow, what would it be? And I want to know why.
Be kind to everybody. Because being brutal to others, pointing out other people's flaws or differences is just mean and spiteful. And everybody has a gift and everybody has a flaw. Why not start with the gift?
I love that.
Thank you.
Now I have another question for you. This is a personal one. This is not a Jay Shetty one. But if you happen to have the attention of the whole world for 5 minutes, what would you say?
Every single one of us is a human. We're all human. Every single one of us, when you cut us, we all bleed the same. Learn that. Stop picking people apart for being a little different. Realize that beige is boring. If everybody was exactly the same, first of all, there'd only be 2 of us. Man and a woman, because there'd be no point in having any more. And second, we'd all be bored to tears.
Well, thank you so much. And now, where can the listeners connect with you?
Well, you can find me at Suicide Zen Forgiveness, the podcast. You can find me at Elaine Lindsay everywhere. If you look up Elaine Lindsay or the lady with the blue hair or my company, Cruel Social, you will find me. All the socials, all over the web, I'm there.
Awesome. And I will link all of that in the show notes directly. And before we close out, is there anything else you want to share with the listeners?
Yeah. Make the very most of your today, every day.
I love that. That's beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Elaine. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I just think you are such a joy.
Of course. So are you. And thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of Mandy's Mindset. In case no one told you today, I'm proud of you. I'm rooting for you. And you got this. As always, if you enjoyed the show, I would really appreciate it if you would leave me a 5-star rating, leave a review, and share it with anyone you think would benefit from this. And don't forget, you are only one mindset shift away from shifting your life. Thanks, guys. Until next time.